hi everybody. Welcome back for day 3 of track and field. And once again, we're going to start with Frank to give a quick intro on the program tonight. Frank?
Okay, thanks, Jimson. Welcome everybody. Great to see you all back. And newcomers, warm welcome to you. Just to give you a little bit of background to all of this, this is being organized by the European Athletics Coaches Association. Jimson is going to be leading from throughout the program, but it's been all brought together by Giacomo Galetto, the General Secretary, who I think has done a fantastic job in doing so. Each area coaches association around the world are trying to do their own version of this. What Giacomo's managed to do is organize a session every evening at this time throughout the games. We're very fortunate in our panelists, fantastic panels, particularly tonight, I have to say, because it's 2 o'clock in the morning across there, to welcome Sean Pickering, who's the treasurer of the European Coaches Association. He's going to be giving us some comment on the throws. The idea of what we're doing now is, if you like, putting our toe in the water of where we think we're going to be going with the Coaches Association in the future. The Global Athletics Coaching Academy has started something called the World Athletics Coaches Club that will be featured on every World Athletics Championships from now on. But we had this bright idea of having an area version of that. And this is us trying that out. So in the future, what we're looking for is that at every European Athletics Championships, there will be an on-site coaches club, a place for coaches to meet, network, get a bit of CPD done, and so on. But also, because of the world that we're in now, we've worked out that we can do something virtually. And that's what this is all about. And I think what we're going to run through this week is the start of a huge new journey for European Athletics Coaches Association and for our members out there. So without any further ado, let me pass you on to the conductor of this great orchestra tonight, Jimson Lee.
Great, thanks, Frank. Yeah, so for those who don't know me, if it's your first time tonight, I'm Jimson Lee from speedendurance.com. And I think we've got a really big agenda tonight. We have 12 events to cover. I'll do them in order of what happened from morning to evening session, but I want to start off with the discus throw because we have Sean Pickering on the call from Tokyo. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and welcome, Sean. I know it's late. Thank you for attending. And I want to talk about the women's discus, the pouring rain. What kind of conditions was it like for the women? How bad was the rain? How bad was the delay? And what do you think on your thoughts of tonight's discus?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Thank you for bringing me in, Jimson. We had some issues in the lead up to the competition because the World Athletics brought in some new shoe regulations because of the super shoes that are coming in sprints and jumps and things like that. And they've applied that across all events. And we from the throws community were trying to point out that doesn't necessarily work so well in the throwing arena because we don't know what the conditions are like, and the conditions may change, and therefore the footwear may be required. And they were asking us to get the athletes to sign up to declare what shoes they were going to wear before the competition. And I'm saying, most of the athletes have not even seen the circle before the qualification round, and then the conditions can change. And we had a perfect example of that today. After the second round, it started to pour down with rain and became very slippery. First of all on the circle, but also in holding on to the discus, and particularly Liliana Carr, who's the Portuguese girl, slipped over, and that was kind of the signal for them to hold the competition. They held the competition up for an hour. Similarly with the pole vault that was going on, changed a lot of things. But the other thing that was interesting in the discus and the women's discus is that we kind of have a new generation led by Valerie Ullman, the young American girl that came through and had a big throw, 69 meters in the first round, an opening throw. But the interesting thing about Valerie is she comes from a dance background. She was a hip hop jazz dancer as a youngster, and came from that background background, and she brings that kind of rhythm and movement. She's a very fit, strong, athletic-looking discus thrower, and I think this is very good for the sport because it opens up another avenue, another channel to bring in more female athletes that are perhaps from different backgrounds and can bring in those skills and her technique. And I know we have Anders Bergstrom on here, and he's done a lot of work on the biomechanics, but she has a very, very smooth and very efficient technique. It's not based on strength. It's not based on the sheer power like we have with some of the athletes of the past. And you saw the difference today in terms of the kind of the changing of the guard. I think it was very interesting to see Valerie perform so well, and to throw that kind of distance. I think it's very few people have thrown further than that in a major championships or Olympic Games. So interesting.
Yeah, do you think they should have suspended or interrupted the discus like 20 minutes earlier? Because people were slipping, right? Started with
I think when they started slipping badly and Liliana Carr went down, actually slipped and went down, was when they realized that it was dangerous. And we kind of forewarned them about this. I had some discussions with World Athletics, with John Ridgen and some of the other people about this shoe rule for exactly this purpose. It's kind of interesting in the new shoe definition that in the past, in the World Championships in 1987, for example, my old coach, John Powell, decided it started to rain at the beginning of the competition, and he kept his training shoes on and threw and could stand up in the circle when everyone else was still trying to search for the right shoes. And as a 40-year-old man, held on for a silver medal, put a big throw 66 meters out, and then let the other guys try and chase him. But under the new shoe rules, you couldn't put your training shoes on because they're not allowed. You have to have a pre-approved list of shoes, which are the manufacturer's throwing shoes. And we were trying to explain to them that sometimes the throwing shoes that the manufacturers make don't have the kind of sole or sole material on them that would stand up to these different conditions. And we don't know what the circle's going to be like. This happens to be quite a fast circle, which when it's dry, it's okay. But as soon as the rain came down, it just became like ice, and the choice of footwear made a big difference. And you saw that the confidence of the athletes, it took a couple of rounds. Once it started up again, it took a couple of rounds before they were confident about trying to put the power down. And only in the last, the fifth and sixth round, do we see some progress from some of the other athletes. Kristen Prudence from Germany had a very good throw to take the silver medal, and that came in the fifth round. But she is also the type of athlete, a typical strong, tall girl that throws with fixed feet, better suited for those kind of conditions as well. So Sandra Perkovic was struggling a little bit, and the discus was hitting the cage and things like this. So I don't know whether Anders has any thoughts on that, because I know he follows the biomechanics a lot on this area as well with the throwing conditions here.
Wow, let's hope for the men's discus. A nice, sunny, hot, dry day. Just in general here, anybody wants to ask Sean a question or put it in the chat like Michael Bennett did, because Sean may fall asleep in the next half an hour or so. Any questions for Sean? Any panelists want to ask him about discus today?
I do have one question. What are some of the requirements currently set for the shoe design? Because I know there have been a lot of changes recently where there's been some limitations as far as the design of shoes and technology. What are some of the requirements now related to shoe design? Is it just the style and the shape, or is it
the only real factors that are involved are the thickness of the sole and relative to the heel. That a throwing shoe now has to have, for a size 8 shoe or something, cannot have any thicker sole than 20 millimeters. Partly this comes from the running shoe design, that they have the marathon shoes, and they were getting higher and higher and taller and longer to give an advantage. And so they limited the depth of the sole. So the throwing shoes, they have to stick within 20 millimeters. But the other factor is that they have to be on a list of approved shoes. And that means the manufacturers, Nike, Adidas, whatever, they have to have the shoes that conform and they're on a list. And then you get into questions about, like, for example, we had some shoes that we had a different sole put on for one of our throwers. And then is that a modification of the shoe? Does that come into the new regulations on experimental shoes, or is it just a repair? And so we were trying to get some confirmation from World Athletics as to how they were going to interpret this, because of exactly the situation that happened today.
Okay.
Yeah, related to that as well too. So if you have like a university, or one-off design, would that be something that could be used for after? Because even something that I do, if I'm engineering, you have some new designs you're trying to do for shoes based on improving performance or reducing injury. Is that something that you can do? For Great Britain, you all have like Loughborough University, you have Sheffield Hammond University. They have really big sports engineering programs. Are you able to actually use those shoes, or was it limited only to the list of companies that actually have sent shoes to World Athletics to be approved?
In the same way that there are licensed throwing implements that you have to apply to World Athletics to get the license, they're doing the same thing now with shoes. They have to be on an approved list. And then you get into the question, are we talking about modified shoes? I was talking to one of the top sprints coaches today that's involved in the design of the shoes with Puma, and he said that the shoes that they're producing now for the sprinters are costing about $4,000 a pair to make for some of these sprinters, and they tune them to different people. And he said, well, that's just not practical. It's not going to happen. And they're certainly not going to invest any kind of money like that into throwers. So we get the standard shoes that cost, $30 to make, and they sell for $75. And then the question is, if we take it upon ourselves to modify them by putting a different sole material on, and is that seen as a repair and not a modification? But if we wanted to design something, there's nobody going to put in springs in the throwing shoes in the same way that they're doing carbon plates with the sprint shoes, for example.
Great. So, Sean, thank you very much. I need to move on to the next topic here. This is great insight on shoes and the discus, so thank you again. I want to call on and move on to the distance events now. I want to ask Gunter Lange from Germany. He is a world leader in endurance events, coaching high performance, and now he's the Ugandan Special Presidential Assistant to Education and Sport. So welcome back, Gunter, again, for a night in a row. I want to talk about the women's 5,000 meters, about Hassan. She won, but also her fall in the 1,500 meters in the early rounds. What are your thoughts about her fall and her 5,000 tonight, back to back?
Thank you, Jimson. I think from the endurance side, we could call it the Hassan Sifan Day, because going for 3 events and having today the challenging task, falling 400 meters before the finish line, and then to qualify from the end of the race and having same day the 5,000 meter was quite interesting to observe. First of all, I was not surprised that she was able to catch up in the qualification of the 1,500. However, it indicates a little bit also of the character of this outstanding athlete. You and I, definitely, I would have, if I would have been in her shoes, not run faster than to make the safe place of 6th or 5th position to qualify for the 1,500 meter. And as some of you may have seen, she didn't do that. She continued. She was winning that race, coming from the back. So this indicates a little bit what kind of personality we have. And you asked me yesterday the question, how does it come, how this decision was made to go for 3 events? So I did a little bit of homework and got the clear background information from 2 people who are decision makers in the Dutch team, and both told me, forget about us, decisions about Hassan are only made by herself. she is the one and only who will tell us what she wants and what she will do, and we have to arrange accordingly. And in that case, they were both accepting that she wants to go for 3 events. In the 5,000 meter, I observed her especially on that, looking for the 3 events. She did, on the other side, the minimum possible to win that race. So she was hanging in the back, was strictly almost the whole race on lane 1. She was not worried to be boxed in, and she frankly did the race from the back. And it was interesting to observe. I was sitting around 150 meters at the water jump, because there was also steeplechase today. And when she passed the group, she was more looking backwards than forwards. She did just the necessary pace to make sure that she is doing as with lowest effort as possible today, the 5,000 meters. So congratulations to that. And I look forward to see if she will manage the other 2 events, because we have strong competitor and fatigue will definitely come.
Most definitely. Anybody has questions for Gunter, can you please type it in the chat about the 5,000 or the 1,500 meter heats. Any questions? Giacomo, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to have Gunter's opinion on our Italian Nadia Battocletti, the 2nd European on the finish line. I think she had a very solid race today, improving almost 10 seconds, very close to the national record. She's a young runner, so I'd like to have your opinion, Gunter.
Can I ask you to make the question more precise? In what extent? In what area you want me to comment?
Yeah, about potential.
About what?
Potential of this girl.
It's very difficult to judge potential from one race, and the performance on the finish line. To make an idea about potential, I would not look at a race. I think it is a general error in potential or talent identification to look at competitions and the way competitions are won or not won. A competition is not a tool to identify talent. The talent is identified, and this is beyond endurance events, in the ability of the athlete to adapt to the hopefully correct means and methods. So in the ability to adapt to the training, you can identify the talent correctly. You have a group of 10, 12 athletes which are exposed to optimal training, and then the 1 or 2 athletes who are able to improve best. This would be the one where I would sign there is some potential. But again, I would make this only for the next phase. So I'm tired to see still in some countries that we have a young athlete, 16, 18, and then they talk about Olympic performance, which should be at the age of 27. So please don't use competition for potential or talent ID. Look at the training, the ability to adapt to hopefully correct training means and methods. And then if you make a prognosis, please only for the next phase. So potential athlete who is good in adaptation for youth, we can think about juniors, but not about seniors. So I refuse to make a potential prognosis just based on one competition. I would like to see the training which is behind that performance, and at least the training of half a year.
Okay. You're on mute, Giacomo. Okay. Oh, you're fine. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the next event. So let's do the men's long jump in the morning session, as we saw a tie, and I'm going to call on Danie Cornelius on this topic. So Danie is head of TuksAthletics at the University of Pretoria and high performance coach in the long and triple jump. She's now manager of athletics South Africa Relay Program. Welcome back, Danie. I want to hear about the men's long jump. We had a tie. It's like Adam Nelson, the shot put back in 2004. 2 men tied. You go back on the count back. In this case, we had a tie, and the silver medalist was what, 8:11. What are your thoughts about the men's long jump tonight?
Thanks, Jimson. Yeah, I've learned one thing. There's a few things I've learned watching tonight's or this morning's long jump. The first thing is don't think 1 centimeter means anything. 1 centimeter can be a hell of a lot. I've also learned if you're injured, you don't participate. Rather sit out and look after yourself. The second thing is, or the third thing I've learned is that don't do high jump and long jump. And the fourth thing I've learned is that it's not over until the fat lady or the Greek lady has sung, because it was amazing. I mean, we came in with Echevarria, opening with 8:09, and then he did the 8:41, and everybody thought,
was she caught in the wrong place?
He would be winning. And I can see all the other guys were just jogging around, and I thought that this is a very boring long jump competition. And then all of a sudden, in the last round, it was just like something happened. And Tyson Gay, which was one of the favorites, he was definitely injured. He should not have jumped. And in the last round, Mclaughlin from Sweden had like a 1 centimeter step over. That was a massive jump that he just missed. That would have been the gold medal. And then came a Tentaglow, and he actually won the gold medal on comeback, because Echevarria just had a 8:09, and Tentaglow had an 8:11, he had an 8:10, he had an 8:15, and then he won the gold medal. And I thought when Lulu Manyonga lost the gold medal in Rio in 2016, that was very, very close. Well, this is a Olympic Games full of surprises. I think this was one of the most interesting events happening, and that they would actually win on comeback. And I don't think I tried to do some research today. I couldn't find anything ever in the past in the long jump that we had 2 athletes in the long jump at the Olympic or the World Championships, men, that actually had the same distance, and they tied and they had to go on a comeback, which is amazing. I think and the last round was just the minor places just changed quite often, and I think that's the way athletics should be. And I think this was a great testament to long jump as well. And the guy from well, he was also the best jumper for the year, because he had 8:60. The Greek Tentaglow, he had 8:60, and then he came and he also won it. So I think it's well deserved. He really was the best athlete on the day.
Yeah, I found it like not strange, but in long jump we have a count back, in high jump we have a count back or collusion, like we saw last night. In the bobsled, there is no count back. It's a tie no matter what. And we saw that a few years ago with Canada tying for gold. Michael Bennett, you had a question. Your microphone's very weak, so I don't know if you have that adjusted. You have your hand up still, or is that from before? On the
Yes, I was going to make one comment related to the jumps. If you can hear me, the main comment I'm going to make is I'll notice that with the long jump that happened yesterday, there was some interesting things that were going on between the one athlete for the United States that was competing, formerly competed for LSU. We had a hard time kind of getting on the board. Then you had the different athletes you saw that competing from Cuba. And then also the one athlete that was competing, I believe from, I forgot the country's name. But it was a pretty interesting overall performances. But you can see a lot of times that the athletes may need to overall have some improvement on their biomechanics, really from the standpoint of the sprinting. And you saw some athletes, especially athletes from Cuba, their sprinting mechanics were not really at a very high level. So causing to lose some of their overall speed on the board. Then they weren't able to get as far as where it could be. Like I saw the 2 gentlemen that were from Cuba, and I could easily see, at least from my standpoint as a coach, And as a scientist, that I could see that they could easily add half a meter, if not more, to their jumps, just with minor improvement in technique and performance. And that's kind of what you see sometimes is even do a lot of work on the technique for that jump, they still need to have some of the overall base athletic performance and fitness really fine-tuned to have their overall maximum for potential to be realized.
So Danie, any comments on Michael before we move on to sprints?
No, I agree with him. I think there is a lot of technical work that can be done with the athletes. But I think also what one must remember, I mean, Echevarria is one of the best jumpers in the world. Technically, he's actually a great athlete. But I think he also went in injured because he wasn't on his last jump. His second last jump, he just sat out, and his last jump, he wasn't there. So, but I agree with him. There should be, there can be a lot of technical changes. But what I just can say is that you can see that the long jump and the high jump with Harrison was really a problem. Yesterday took out a lot of energy from him, and still I think he got a 5th place today, which is not bad. But I don't think he was actually very weak. He had a 757, a 770, a 796, a 787, a 749, and he had one jump that was 815. So I think at some point in time, you also have to make a decision to decide, am I doing a high jump? Am I going to do long jump? You can't do both of them. It's not working. But technically, I agree. There's still some work that many of the athletes can do. And this wasn't the best competition I've ever seen in my life, but I still think it was a decent one. And it was exciting, especially the last round, or the 2 last rounds. I think it was very exciting and a great event to watch. Pity I wasn't there, but it was a great event to watch.
Oh, great. Okay, this is getting really good. Danie, thank you for your comments. I want to move on to the women's 200 next. Hang on a second. Let me just. So we have a lot of people joining here, so I apologize for the bells. Okay, so now they all heard me talk about the women's 200. Women's 200 meters. I want to call on Christine Harrison-Bloomfield next to be the panelist. For those who don't know Christine, she's former Great Britain national team athlete, now high performance sprints coach, who has worked with Olympic gold medalist Christine Ohurugu. So thank you, Christine, for joining again tonight. So I got 4 things to ask you about. So pick one or all 4. Everyone else can type in the chat or raise your hand. So you have Shericka Jackson, 1, easing up and not making the next round. 2, you have the 3 Americans who all came from college backgrounds fizzle in the semifinal, so only 1 made it to the final. 3, can Shawnee double the 2 and 4? And the last question would be the 2 controversial Namibia athletes who made it, the last 2 qualifiers. So let's start with easing up Shericka Jackson. Were you cringing when you saw that? What were your thoughts on that and everything else?
I was quite shocked because she's quite experienced and she's been in Olympic finals. It's not like it. I mean, I know it wasn't the final, but it was a semi-final. But she's been in the position. I think as her coach, he must have been sat there fuming. And if I always say to my athletes, run through the line. You know, the race is not over until you cross the line. It doesn't matter how good you are. And you've got to understand that it's an Olympic Games and people do strange things and people will run to the line to make either a fastest loser or they try and beat the person who is number 1 or is expected to go through. So I think, and she didn't look around, which was really surprising. So I found that, I was disgusted actually, to be honest with you, because she stopped us from experiencing quite a good high level race in the final. So yeah, that wasn't very good at all.
Okay.
Sorry. Go.
The next one was the 3 Americans, all ran sub 22 at US trials a month ago. The American team didn't have a holding camp. They came straight here 5 days before, not used to the weather, jet lag. What are your thoughts on the American system? Do you think they should change it or?
Well, normally they do have holding camps. I think it's because of the pandemic and a lot of people, I mean, the Americans haven't traveled, and you listen to Michael Johnson, a lot of Americans haven't traveled. They've stayed in the US. They've competed in the US. They haven't been around the European circuit or going to Asia or anywhere. They basically stayed there. Now, I don't know if Gabby has been injured, but since she ran that 2160, she hasn't competed since then. You know, she stayed in the USA. And I think personally, you know, you need to acclimatize. It doesn't matter how experienced you are, you need to acclimatize to the conditions that you're competing in. And if you see the people that have done extremely well. I think personally it's a huge mistake because I expected Pandini to be in the final. I expected them to be pushing the Jamaicans for medals. But I do think Gabby Thompson, I think for me was disappointed, and technically she wasn't the same. She was very fluent in the American trials, very consistent. And when she ran that 2160, that was phenomenal. But if you look at the way she ran and you put them side by side, technically she broke down, her technique broke down. And when she saw that girl coming up on the inside of her, I think she was shocked and she didn't expect anybody to challenge her. And I think that's the problem. There's a bit of, I don't know if there's a bit of arrogance, and the same with Sharika, why Sharika didn't qualify. You know, there's a bit of arrogance and not valuing other athletes. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
You're on mute.
I couldn't hear you, yeah.
I'm trying to, people are joining left, right, and center here, so all the bells keep coming. So the schedule for the women's 200, you had the morning run, quarterfinals, semifinals later on, and the finals tomorrow, which is unusual. Like the men's 400 has 2 days rest. So Graham Harrison asked, do you think there were some very fast times? Have the girls run too fast? Have they taxed their central nervous system? And will they recover in time for tomorrow's final? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the top girls definitely 100% will recover. Those people that have run, like the young girl, the 18-year-old girl, Christine, because she's young, I think it's different for young people because they come in with no fear, and she's conditioned. Remember, they come from the 400, so they were meant to be competing in the 400 and they've been moved down to the 200. So the work that they've done, the speed endurance work, the special speed endurance work that they have done would cover this, and they will be able to adapt their bodies towards it, I think. And I think Elaine Thompson, she didn't actually run through the line, and nor did Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce. If you look, they shut down within between 40 and 30 meters from the line. So they ran the turn. And I think sometimes what the Jamaicans do, what Stephen Francis does, is he works on elements of the race. So they know that they're going to win. So they work on elements. So you can see that Elaine Thompson wants to be the first person off the turn come the final. So she executed her turn exactly how she wants to run in the final. So she's practicing that. Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, same thing, executed the turn, came off, and she flew off the turn. So both of them are working on particular elements of the 200. So I don't think they tax their central nervous system. Some of the others might have, but I don't think those top ladies would have.
Okay, and then the third question I had was, can Shawnee double the 2 and 4? That schedule is brutal compared to the men's. What are your thoughts?
Well, Lance Bauman is quite experienced in doing this, and he's done it with other people before. So I have every faith and confidence in it. I don't think Shawnee is a Shawnee back in April, May, when she ran 22.03 and was world lead. I wasn't personally impressed with how she ran, and I think she has an outside chance. I'm not convinced that she's gonna medal, and I think she's gonna find it very difficult going into the 400. But I think she has more chance in the 400 of winning the 400 than she does in the 200, to be perfectly honest. But she is conditioned. People have to understand she's progressed. When she ran in 2016, she was a young girl. She had not very little exposure. Lance has built her to do this. He wanted to do this, and they prepared for this. So you've got to understand, she hasn't really taxed herself. She hasn't run 21 this year yet. We don't know what's going to happen. She hasn't run 48 this year. So I think she can, but I don't think she's going to win both of them.
Okay, and the last point, if you want to answer, about the two controversial Namibia athletes, with Caster situation, they banned 400, 800, and 1500 meters for those athlete types. So these two athletes dropped down to around 200, and they're very tall. What are your thoughts on that, if you want to answer?
What I think is really strange is if they've got too high a testosterone level, surely it's going to help them in the 200 as well. I know we haven't got the research, but it's obvious that it's going to have an impact on their ability to go through the rounds and their ability to bounce back. And you can see even from what they've done now, I mean, 18-year-old, she ran 21:97, world junior record, world under 18 record. That's what she ran in the semi-finals. And her technique is not efficient. The last 50 meters, if you see her arms were flailing, and I was surprised. I've never seen anybody run so poorly technically, mechanically, and run so fast. So there's obviously a lot more in the bank. And I think that, it's unfortunate for the people that are in the 200 that they've moved down. But I personally think the testosterone has had an impact on them, and it obviously will have an impact. Otherwise, we wouldn't ban it. If women we've had women with testosterone levels before and they've been banned. So they've got it naturally. It's not their fault, but they have it naturally. So obviously it's going to have a positive impact on their performance.
Okay, thank you. I see Michael has put some comments in the chat. I do want to move on to pole vault next. We got a big agenda tonight. So pole vault, I'm going to call on two panelists. We have Herbert Zingen, and we have Peter Eriksson as well. Herbert is a world leading strategist in high performance coaching across all events. He's a German national coach in women's pole vault and personal coach to Olympic and world and European athletes. And we also have Peter Eriksson, who's the former GB head coach, and now he's with Canada's Own the Podium. Now, the reason why I'm asking about pole vault is that we saw the rain delay. We saw what happened with Sandy Morris, didn't make it to the final. And we had Canada's Alicia Newman, who no-heighted. So let's start with Herbert first. Herbert, welcome back from last night.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Comments on the rain tonight in the rain.
Yeah,
and rain
of course.
delay.
Of course, the pole vault is always very unwelcome for the pole vaulters because it is not only a disturbance, it is also a huge safety factor. And most athletes have to find a way around the conditions. You can't probably not. You must change your approach probably depending on the conditions. You can't go the normal path of the pole strength, the pole stiffness, and the grip heights, and so on. But this is normally, if you have a break like this, most pole vaulters are used to that. It is not very unusual. Maybe in the Olympic championships, in Olympic games, it's a little bit different because most of them are very hyped up, very psyched up. And it is very hard for them to calm down a little bit because you never know how long the break will take. And so this is a big mental game that all the athletes have to go through. This was probably unwelcome for the athletes, but they should have been able to deal with it. And you mentioned Sandy Morris. She really had a huge problem because a pole broke exactly at the point, as much as I've seen in TV, where her pole is touching the upper ridge of the box. It is about 30 centimeters from the end, which is quite unusual. And I only saw the pole for a very short moment, but it seems that there was no protection on the pole, protecting this spot. But it is very, very often the case that if a pole breaks there, it would not have been broken when you would have had some protection for that spot, and probably her pole lacked that. She seems to have herself injured also in this jump, and so she was not able to get to her normal jumping back. This is, of course, a very sad thing for the whole pole vault final. In the end, we will miss her there, and I hope she's able to do the rest of the season at least injuries where she at the iliopsoas, I think she tore or pulled her iliopsoas. It's not unusual for the pole vault, and it can take some time to recover from this. I have not seen the jumps of Alicia Newman, and I don't know anything about her state before. She was starting very early for 25. Normally she would start at 440 or 450. Maybe she even came to Tokyo in an injured state, which is a very bad thing to do for a top athlete. If you're injured, you should not go chances and risk a bigger injury, or maybe a real mental downer, no hiding in the qualification. So these are two of the top athletes we're missing in the final. There are more. There is Michaela Meyer, who has a PB of 480. And also there is the Australian girl, Nina Kennedy. She had a very, very good outdoor season in Australia in spring, jumping 482 hugely, and she couldn't make the final here. Also, my former athlete, I've been working with her until last year, Angelika Moser from Switzerland. She was expecting her to be in the final for sure. And she couldn't really deal with the conditions, I think. Looking at her jumps, she was, after the break, the first jump at 455, she was not getting far enough to clear the bar. Because she was probably not warmed up enough or not mentally really ready after that break. Maybe it got her by surprise. And the next two jumps, she just blew through the poles. The poles were too soft, and so she couldn't make the 455, which was her worst result this year during this outdoor season. So we can see that there is a big impact from the weather conditions and from this break on the outcome of the qualification. And I hope we will have a better final without any rain interruptions there. Maybe Peter Eriksson wants to add something from his point of view.
Yeah, Peter.
Well, it's going to be very little when it comes to pole vault because number one, the TV here didn't show it, except they showed Alicia Newman running through her jumps 3 times. She never jumped, actually. And they didn't show Annika Newell, who actually qualified, right? So I haven't seen any of it except for those 2 things. And it wasn't shown at all here. I can comment on later, maybe on this issue with higher testosterone levels, if that discussion comes up later. No?
Okay. Anything else on pole vault? We'll save that topic for later, but anything on pole vault? Anybody want to chime in or type in the chat? If not, I will move on to hurdles. And hurdles, I will call on Rita Engelbrecht. She's a world authority in high performance hurdle technique and preparation, formerly South Africa head hurdles coach and coach to Olympic hurdles and mentor to coaches of Olympic hurdlers. Welcome back, Rita. So we have 2 hurdle events. We had the 100-meter women final, and we had the women's semifinal, 400-meter backstroke and butterfly in that horrible weather. Let's start with the 100-meter final in the morning session. What we talked about it yesterday. We said it was going to take a sub 1240 to win. I think we were both right. What are your thoughts on the women's finals tonight or this morning?
Thank you very much. I think the 100-meter hurdles, we discussed it yesterday, and I think the results came exactly as we predicted, that Jasmine Quinn got the gold medal in her 12:37. It wasn't as fast as we thought. Maybe she would have come closer to the world record. And then a 12:52 for Harrison. Now, I must say that I looked at the race a few times also in slow motion because they run so quickly. It's much easier to see it watching in slow motion. And Kendra Harrison looked like she got a very good start. But if you look in slow motion, they were running next to each other. The touchdown on hurdle 1 was exactly the same. Then Kendra moved slightly forward, and it looked like on hurdle 3, maybe she's going to go. But then, of course, Jasmine came in, being taller, and I think she was just that much stronger going through the race. And although Harrison is the more perfect technician, I must say that I take my hat off the way Jasmine ran the race, the rest of the race. I must say that of all the hurdles events, and we'll still have to see the 110-meter hurdles, is that I was quite disappointed in the fact that you got a gold medal, a bronze medal with 12:55. When last did that happen? When last did you see 13:01 and 2:13s in the 100-meter hurdles? I mean, to come fifth with the 12:75, the girl from the Netherlands, for me, that is not maybe. The shift is now this year to the 400 hurdles, and the 100 hurdles is not that strong for one. What other reasons, I don't know. But as we know, in all events, we have ups and downs, and not that it is at all a down. I mean, that was a fantastic time, that 12:26, the Olympic record in the semifinals. But I think also that the silver medal to America means a lot, because last year she couldn't qualify although she was a world record holder, she couldn't qualify. So I think maybe, I don't think she's far from finishing her career. And I think there's a lot to come still for her. But I must say, what I was really impressed to see is how in the development of the hurdles, how that trail leg drives off the hurdle, especially of the top hurdlers. They are just an example to follow, I think, for all coaches. For her, so as far as that is concerned, I think it was a fantastic race, and I think Jasmine didn't make the final in Rio, but she was so glad. I was glad for her as well, and unfortunately, there can only be one gold medal unless you're in the men's high jump. So that is as far as the women, the 100-meter hurdles. In the 400-meter hurdles, I must say, in that pouring rain, I don't know if anybody is going to touch Sydney Mclaughlin. She flew over those hurdles. Again, Delilah Muhammad also over that hurdles. But in that last 100 meters, I don't know if anybody can touch Sydney. And if I looked at how she relaxed over that last bit, and come so close to 50, to that time that she ran. If she would have run through, most probably it would have been a new world record in the semifinal. And I didn't see that from any of the other athletes. Femke Ball, also a fantastic race. She ran well. I saw her, she normally takes 15 strides all the way through. I think I saw her change, most probably moving to 16 because she was running slower. And again, very, very strong. And I think if she didn't relax at the end as well, she would have had a very, very good time. So yes, I think we are going to be in for a fantastic race, just like the men's going to come up. From a technical point of view, I think Mohammed is in the first 5 hurdles, nobody can touch her. But then again, it comes the strength, just like in the women's hurdles, that last strength. And after Mclaughlin ran 12:74 in the women's 100 hurdles in a preparation, you can see it. There was a definite plan in doing that. So yes, it's going to be brilliant. And I think just like the men, it's most probably going to take a world record to win that race. Fantastic overall. And well done to those athletes and those women and the coaches. My hat off to them.
Okay, Gunter, you have your hand up. Any comments on the hurdles, either one?
Thank you, Jimson. I want to make a general comment on the outstanding sprint performances we have observed. So we have discussed about high testosterone level. We have discussed of shoe modification, but I think we are missing one biomechanical crucial point, and this is the surface we have in this stadium. You are all aware that the force reduction should be a minimum of 35%. And if the force reduction is reduced, means the surface is getting harder, this will further improve the sprint performance because it contributes to the shortening of the ground contact. On the other hand, our 10,000 meter runners after the race were not really happy because they had some from the hard surface caused muscle, joint pains, and even some reaction on the food. So I think that when we look at performance, we should not just look at increased performance at all costs. We are, I think, all against artificial testosterone increase, and we also agree that in a female group where the testosterone level is 22 to 3, and we have athletes competing which have 20, 25, which is more than I have in my age. We should not neglect that also the surface is contributing to performance, but on the other hand, also a risk factor for the health of our athletes. Thank you.
Thanks, Gunter. I put an article from my blog from 2012 when both Frank and I were in London and we had a chance to interview Sally Pearson's coach. So interesting thoughts about stride length, stride frequency, and in hurdles, the flight time versus run time. So interesting stats if you want to dig in more on hurdles. Okay, Christine, you had a question? Your hand up?
Not a question, but just an observation. We had a discussion about the new shoes, and a lot of athletes were getting injured because they hadn't. So some coaches knew the shoes were coming out, and so they conditioned their athletes' calves to make sure that they could cope with the forces that they were going to produce and the way they were going to run. Some athletes have got calf injuries and have had quad injuries and hamstring injuries because their bodies were not conditioned to accept the new shoes because people didn't know what they were going to do. I've tried them on, and I really think they do make a massive difference to performance. I ran in them and somebody thought I was a young person running. I just wanted to see what it gave you, and it makes you come off the ground very quickly, a lot quicker than maybe you would normally come off the ground. And maybe an assessment of what has happened to people's bodies. How many injuries have we incurred over this year in relation to the different shoes that they've been wearing? And looking at their mechanics from last year to this year, I know that coaching has evolved and we're looking at the technical elements, but looking at what is the difference in their technique last year to this year. Because if you look at the women's 100 meters, a lot of them, the last part of their races, women don't tend to hold on to their form. And if you look at Elaine Thompson, if you look at Shalane Fraser-Price, and if you look at Sharika, I know she's not here, Sharika Kari, and her knee lift, it's far superior, and it's more like a man's knee lift than it is like how females run. So I think we should maybe look at some research into that and the implications of what's happened this year in relation to the sprints and the way people are performing.
Great, thanks for that. Michael Bennett, you had a comment on that. Your hand's up.
I do have a comment. One of the big things you're looking at here with the way that both the surface properties are, then also the shoe properties, you have two things you're looking at. You have the actual force being put into the surface as well into the shoe from the actual athlete itself, both from the standpoint of force weight, and then the actual force they're putting down from their muscles. Some of that's going to be a lateral force that you have of them traveling down the track, and then some of it is the actual vertical forces of them actually pushing down. What you're looking at for performance is you're trying to balance up between the dampening effect that you're going to have with the actual surface absorbing that force, then changing that force into heat production to actually lessen that actual reactive forces. Then you're also having some of the spring reactive forces that actually propels them both back up vertically and also forward. And that happens both with the shoe design and also with the TuksAthletics itself. So one of the things we have to look at here, there is some changes and improvements in overall athletes' performance as far as being able to hold their technique longer especially with even some athletes I've trained, you're looking at some of the ways they're trying to actually have their top speed happen later, where it's either at 55 meters or even as long as I have some athletes I have actually hit top speed at around 72 meters. And then they hold that top speed for around 10 to 15 meters. So they don't actually start slowing down until 85, maybe even 90 meters. So the finishing phase where they're slowing down is only 10 to 15 meters. So you're seeing some of that happening versus it really being a difference between a man and a woman. From my standpoint, either exercise science and the coach, there's not a lot of difference really in the actual way the muscles function or the way the structure functions. It's just about their ability to sustain force and have a certain amount of force output. And then how do you manage them both from a force standpoint, muscle standpoint, both from the actual production and also ultimate force, and then how do you manage their energy systems? Because you do have a certain overall degradation of performance from energy system standpoint. I think you still have the overall change of performance both from a nervous standpoint. And Gunter actually one of the people that I posted about actually the level 5 certification I did a few years ago.
Good, how are you?
One of the big things is how does the athlete break down the performance from a nervous system standpoint, where if they're doing a lot of rounds, you may see that they not able to maintain their knee lift or able to maintain the actual leg turnover that happens a lot. And then with the shoe design, some of what you have in there is actual spring reactive forces are a little higher than what they normally are used to. So some of that comes into really a balancing act. And you do have the actual researchers and engineers and scientists down at Nike or Adidas doing a lot of work, but some of it is actually not being done from a true research standpoint for biomechanics. They're just looking at doing more simulations from using programs like Siemens NX and whatnot, where they're not actually taking into account all the biomechanics that come into play for the athlete as far as how they're moving as a whole. They're just looking at some of the reactive forces at the foot itself and up to the ankle. And they're not doing a lot of that additional work to see how does it really affect the overall performance. Because if you have additional spring reactive forces of 5% extra at the ball of the foot, how does that change the actual force angles and extra vectors at the knee complex or at the hips? And those things they don't generally do a lot of at places like Nike or at Adidas.
Any comments on the shoe? And before we move on, anybody want to raise your hand? There he is, Peter Thompson. Welcome.
Thanks, Jimson. Yeah, what Michael's saying, I kind of agree with a lot. I've worked a lot on the carbon-plated shoes back from 2012 onwards, actually, and so being involved in a lot of research to this. I think what we're seeing, as Christine was saying, some athletes have got used to the shoes, this kinetic element under their feet, but now we're on a much harder surface, which is more related to Atlanta in '96 or Beijing 2008, which were both incredibly hard surfaces. I mean, the old days, they used to have a geometer test where the IAAF had a standard in which the tracks could not be outside of, but that seems to have gone out of the window in the chase for the sprint world records. And Gabby Thompson was unable to come back in the 5,000 in Atlanta because his feet were shredded from running the 10,000. So that's a kind of a side issue. But right now with the shoes, just very simply, I want to bring up with the super shoes and the super spikes. With the spikes and the sprinters, let's talk about the sprinters. I think what we're seeing is a separation there with the sprinters going one of two ways. One is using, I've seen a lot of the sprinters using the Dragonfly spike of Nike. But we've got to remember that New Balance now has sprinters. Maybe that's why Trayvon Burnell didn't do so well, because he was racing in a New Balance carbon-plated shoe. Carsten Warholm, when he broke the world record for the 400-meter hurdles, his Puma shoe is basically a carbon plate with no foam. So it has no extra cushioning in there. And my thought there is that for the 100, 200, 400, up in those distance ranges, because you want a very quick reaction back from the surface, then it's better having just kind of a nude carbon plate, a bit like Oscar Pistorius had, 2 carbon plates, basically. And so the other way is they go with a little bit of the foam to increase the response, the energy return from the shoe, but I think that's too slow. I think in sprinting, we need that quicker return. And so I think we'll probably see possibly a move to just kind of the bare carbon plate for the sprinters. If you watched Carsten do his spring jumps before the start of his world record 400-meter hurdles, he was getting incredible height. And then I've looked at slow motion film of him over the last 3 hurdles in the 400-meter hurdles, and then looked at the athletes inside of him. And the athletes inside have got the usual fatigue and lowering and slowing of the ground contact times, and Carsten didn't have that. So I think the shoes, Michael, you spoke about percentage benefits. Nike talked about 4%, and that's been proven by peer-reviewed research independently. But I've spoken to a couple of brands recently, and one of them has just got a new structure to their kinetic shoe, which gives a 12% return. So I think, there's a whole lot to go on here. And I think World Athletics need to perhaps kind of bring in some controls before it just goes crazy.
No, I definitely agree. We have a lot to talk about shoes, and we're not done yet. Johnson, I see you have your hand up. Any comments on shoes and technologies here?
Well, I was just going to pick up on the point of Christine. I was on the track at Lee Valley, I think it was 2 days ago, or yesterday, I mean, and there was a few of the veterans who were using them, and everybody spoke about the additional performance they had from the spikes. But it's interesting, nobody has mentioned injuries, that the injuries they've suffered had come from the new shoes they've been using. And I don't think that has ever been mentioned or considered before until I just heard Christine this evening. So maybe it is something that needs to be looked at as well.
Christine, anything? No, just nothing. Okay. Well, I think we can talk forever about shoes, but I think we have one more event to talk about, and then we can talk and go back on the testosterone issue. So the last event was the men's 400 meters. I think it was nice to see Karani James back in action. Kind of shocked to see 2 sub-44 in the semifinals, but then again, I'm not shocked because there was 2 days rest between the final. I personally think Steve Gardner's going to win it. I think Karani is going to come second, but we'll see. Anybody want to talk about the men's 400? Anybody? Christine, men's 400.
Yeah, there seems to be a change and a shift in, because there was a couple of years ago when Karani won his world championships, the first time he won, and it looked at the endurance athletes, the strength endurance athletes. And what they talked about today, and what you can see today, is it was all the long-legged guys that actually won the races, and it's their ability to sustain a pace. And the way they started, maybe not as quickly, because if you see in Vanika's heat, they went out so hard. Him and not Isaac. Yeah, they went out really hard, and I was thinking, but that guy Solomon, he's just keeping to his race plan, and he knew, and he just gradually built around. And I can see a change in the way people are starting to run the 400. So they get out, they get to the optimum speed, but they gradually build. And there seems like in the 400, to me, the long-legged guys are gradually building and taking on the shorter, more powerful, more speed-based athletes, especially in the last part of the run. And I know that not everybody was running to their potential, but if you watch the races in the last Olympic, it was a totally different way round. Vanika just went out and hit it hard, and people use that speed. But now you're looking at Solomon, who was world champion. You look at the way he took the race, and how, his technique was so efficient. He was so efficient. And Solomon, he was quite inefficient in his arm action. If you watched him in the last 20 to 30 meters, it was the reason why he didn't win the race is because he didn't maintain his technique. And Solomon was just smooth and fluid. And so with Karani James. I mean, Karani James looked majestic. It's the best I've seen him looking in a long while, but that's because of his Graves' disease. And obviously he can only compete a minimum amount of time. But the thing that I thought was really key to Karani James is they talked about, he's had Harvey glands through the whole of his career. So Harvey knows him infinitely. And I am concerned about Wade Van Niekerk leaving his coach, who he's had his success with, and going to the States. I'm not saying that Lance can't coach, but I'm saying if somebody understands the athlete and you understand the idiosyncrasies, is it right that he moved over to the States? Was it him choosing to move over to the States, or was he asked to move over to the States? Because I don't know that question, but I just think that if you look at Karani James, he's coming back to where he should be. And that's because he's had consistent coaching and he's had the same coach. I'm not saying you should always stay with the same coach, but that has an impact on your performance because you understand. Van Niekerk is learning, you know, how to run. And maybe the training plan at Lance's facility doesn't work for him. Maybe he needs to work in a different way. He felt that he needed speed, but you know, he's run extremely fast prior to his injury. But did he need to go to America to get that speed? You know, I'm not sure, but I found the 3 semi-finals very, very intriguing. Yeah.
No, definitely. Rita, you have your hand up on?
Maybe I can answer on, first thing that I want to mention is that Karani James, that they mentioned that he had an autoimmune disease that affects his thyroid. And those who know anything about an autoimmune disease, and his grandmother died, it's usually about stress and very hard work. So he had to take off time to sort that out. And obviously he comes back refreshed and very good. As far as Wade going to the States concerned, apparently it was a joint decision between him and his coach, because his injury occurred 5 years ago. And it is strange that it takes 5 years to get over a knee injury. And he has been apparently training on the new program for some time, for more than 6 months. I agree with Christine that understanding your athlete and whatever they did worked for him. But whether and how it happens, who would know? You know, we don't always hear the full story. It is their own private private lives and everything like that. And we know his wife went with him and they're expecting their first child. So there's a lot of other family matters that comes into it. So, but we could see that in the races running up to the Olympics that, I mean, that 1-300 race that he was with the guys, and it appears like when he's under pressure, he appears slightly injured or he's limping or whatever. So I think that is a very different situation. And I think the confidence to come back from 43 dead to run and defend after the injury takes a lot of self-belief and for yourself. I just want to mention one thing as well in the 200-meter woman is that we forget about Masalinga, which she's only 16 years old and she ran at 22.60. So she is the 18 years Mabumba who ran 21.97, but the 16-year-old Masalingi, she ran 22.60, and she's also in the final. And she's also one of the ones that is affected by this testosterone genetic condition.
Yeah.
So just that little bit.
Great, thanks. So I'm a firm believer that athletes who change coaches so late in their career never find their peak again. We've seen Sally Pearson, we had Zuzana Henova. So many of them changed coaches very, very late. And I don't know, on Twitter, Stuart McMillan and I had a nice chat about that. And you can go on Twitter and find out more about our findings. But Frank, your opinion on changing coaches. Yeah, Frank.
Yeah, well, of course, in some sports, it's like changing your hairstyle. You know, in tennis, people can always change the coach every other year. And it doesn't seem to affect them one way or the other. But I think the relationship, the bond, particularly if it's been one established over a number of years, you must be very, very careful not to tinker with that and move into another system altogether. And I actually think it was a fundamental error on Wade's part to part company with Ans Botha. She knew this boy really, really well. She understood him. She could hear his. She listened. That was the language that he used, and she used. She could listen to his body. And you might think, well, Frank, this is well away from the world of science, and that's the kind of people we are. Well, I'm sorry, guys. I still think there's an awful lot comes down to the intuitive feelings that coaches have in the relationships with athletes. And I do feel that in this particular situation, it was too late, I think, to be playing around with changing a system that we knew, the world knew worked perfectly. And I strongly suspect that there may have been some influence at agent level for that change.
Yeah, I think so too, but only he knows and Adidas knows. So we got like 20 minutes left. I see Michael has another question. Do you want to talk about 400 meters or coaching changes, or do you want to get back to the testosterone issue? We got three things.
One comment related to the coaching change. One of the things that I definitely know, and the perfect example of it is when you see high-performing high school athletes, or in the sense of junior athletes moving to the senior level, and they change coaches naturally. In the United States, the perfect example is when they go from high school to college and compete NCAA, they're always going to change coaches. Most times, those athletes generally do not do very well their freshman year, even if they were a All-American, or they may have gone to World Juniors and they may have been number 1, number 2 in the world for their age group. They may go through the freshman year in college and they're doing more strength training than they ever did, or they're adding more plyometrics, or the schedule has changed with classes and things like that, where it makes it hard for them to perform at the level to be expected. And they get used to that system until their sophomore or even their junior year. So in this situation here with Wade Van Niekerk, you would expect for him as an athlete to do really well, but it may take him 2 years, maybe even 3 years to really fully acclimate to the new coaching situation for him to perform at his real high level and actually improve. So that's kind of what I would say from that kind of thing there.
Well, the good news is that the next Olympics is 3 years away, not 4 years away. So, Gunter, you have your hand up on something. Gunter, you have your hand on something?
Yes, please. Jimson, before we jump in the final topic of testosterone, you mentioned that we have covered all events of the day. I would disagree, because one of my personal favorite endurance events, there was a 3,000 meter steeple today.
Yeah.
And let me share 1 or 2 thoughts with it. I was not surprised that, as expected, the gold medal went to Morocco, but I have been sitting again at the water jump and watching carefully what different technical models were applied during the race. And it was interesting to see that the second Kenyan, that Kibiwot Abraham, practiced the clearance. And when it was promising to become interesting, will the clearance give him an advantage to the classical step-on technique? But it was unfortunately that Wale, the Ethiopian, and him had, before the last water jump, a contact which caused that what I was looking for, the direct comparison in the fastest clearance of water jump, would not happen. I would even go to the extent, I believe strongly, that the final result could have been looked a little bit different if Kibiwot would have been on the same level over that last barrier. I was a little bit disappointed. I have seen in the years before there was more practice of clearance of the water jump. I will try to find out why those athletes or those coaches who had practiced it in the past suddenly, or now there's a trend no more to use it. But I would also like my colleague Peter Thompson if he would like to give some sense to this idea, because I know from our cooperation that he also was very interested into this topic. What is the biomechanically most efficient way, and what is the best way not to lose too much time over the water jump?
Yeah. Frank, you have your hand up. Comments on that?
Yeah, not kind of related to that, but can just come back to Michael's point. And of course, he's right. That's the way it works in the United States. But I wonder if the notion, this sort of automatic acceptance of going from one coach to another, this kind of transfer system, does it work that way in every other culture? And my bet at this point would be no. That's not to say that it wouldn't, but it's an option. Quite a few athletes have gone the full journey in life with one coach. Sebastian Coe, Steve Ovett, Steve Cram, and several others, Linford Christie and so on. And so I'm not saying that one is better than the other. Maybe it fits in with this culture or that culture, but that's enough of that point. If I can come back a little bit to the discussion on sprint techniques, and we looked at women and we looked at men in the conversations that I was privy to this afternoon. One of the things I learned very late on in my career was from a guy called Jon Tyriak, who was Boris Becker's manager and coach at one point. And he said, Frankie, you must always remember that every technique is a compensation. And I think the point he was trying to make is you cannot take one technical model or even one set of biomechanical principles and apply the same way to every athlete who comes before you. We know, for example, in sprinting, that the bottom line is it's stride length times cadence. That's it. You can add all the other bits and pieces on top of it, but that's what it comes down to. So, for example, we had a lightning performance from China in the men's 100 meters semi-final, where it's my guess you had a cadence that nobody else matched in the entire event. Yeah. On the other extreme, we can come across Usain Bolt, and his cadence was not all that hot, but certainly his stride length was. But we as coaches know one thing above all else: you work with what you've got. You understand the science, you understand the principles, but you work with what you've got. And I think sometimes we can make this whole business of coaching, particularly in sprints, rather more complicated than it needs to be. That's my 10 cents worth on that.
No problem. Peter Thompson, you want to answer Gunter's question, please?
Yes, I'll come back quickly on that. And yeah, Gunter and I have talked about this a lot. And with the athletes I work with in the steeplechase, both men and women, I coach all of them to be able to hurdle the water barrier and also to use a standard technique, and also to take the water barrier with either feet, but never both feet. Think about that one for a moment. So the technique, I think, is best used when towards the end of the race, if you are fresh. And Gunter pointed out that Keegan just brushed the Ethiopian, which slowed Keegan down, took the Ethiopian to the ground. But it interrupted Keegan's approach to the final water jump. And if you watch it, I watched it a couple of times, he slows down quite significantly on landing. And I think he would certainly have been challenging for the silver if he'd had a clear run. So if he'd had the skills, he probably would have chosen to switch to putting his foot on the barrier. But I don't know how much he practices that. And it used to be that when this whole thing started, Randy Jackson at the University of Wisconsin would do the first four laps hurdling, and then as fatigue set in, he'd put his foot on the barrier. And then Henry Marsh got stronger, and he would put his foot on the barrier at the water jump for the first 4 laps, and then hurdle it in the last 3 laps. So I think if you can, then it's a great advantage to be able to hurdle the water jump towards the end of a race if you can keep your momentum going. And I think we're seeing improvements. We had 9 of the first 10 at the NC2A, both men and women steeplechasers ran personal bests. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the kinetic shoes, go back to shoes again, they really help you to keep your active momentum as you're about to cross the barrier, whether you put your foot on the water jump or hurdle it. So yeah, just briefly, that's my take on it. Is if I was a coach, I would recommend always teaching your athlete both techniques and also the ability to decide when to be able to use it.
That sounds good. Rita, you have your hand up. You want to comment on that?
Not necessarily on the comment made now about the shoes and the technique. I just want to, if I'm allowed to, go back and answer on the changing of coaches. Now, I once was at Loughborough University where Frank told us as lecturers, never let your athlete be the victim of your own limitations. Now, we are now in a stage where some of the athletes are clever, they do their own homework, they understand what's going on. And I would like to mention as an example here, Sydney Mclaughlin. She changed coaches after the World Championships last year. Immediately, the first thing she did in the preseason, she ran 100 hurdles all of a sudden. No 400s, no 100s, just 100 hurdles. And then obviously later she ran 400s as well. But immediately there was a change of focus where the coach she's now with said, well, your limitations, look at why did you lose? You lost to a person who is far more superior as far as technique as what you are. Okay, so the technique was her problem. She got strong, she's very strong, she's whatever. She is far skinnier than what she was, and she is flying over those hurdles. So yes, I think the newer generations has got more insight into the sport than what some of the older generation athletes had. And therefore, it is a decision, I'm sure, that wasn't taken lightly, but I think that sometimes athletes start to realize that maybe there are some limitations as well. So yes, I think there are more than one road that leads to Rome eventually, Frank.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I definitely think, well, the 4 hurdles, I always believe is a speed event. I mean, I'm from the era when Irina Privalova of Russia used to run, and she ran sub 7 seconds for 60 meters. That's faster than my PB, right? And she went on to run the 400-meter hurdles, and that was her best event. So, so that's my comment. Peter, did you have a comment? Was that your hand up? No, I was just. So any other questions on hurdles, or we got 6 minutes left? Any more?
Just can I just pop back to Rita's point? You're right, Rita, and I'm not arguing that that it's one or the other. You transfer or you stay. But I think one of the things, and you'll probably remember it from the same lecture at Loughborough, where I said there's only 3 things that a coach should know in life. You've got to know what you know. You've got to know what you don't know, and you've got to know somebody who does and bring them to the party. Because you're right, we can't know everything. In some instances, rather than transfer and change coach, you can work in partnership. There can be 2 or 3 coaches involved. In Sean's world, for example, now, I'll wager that most of the top performers have got a strength and conditioning coach in addition to a technical coach. Whereas in former times, that was unheard of. The coach looked after everything. So I think you're right. There's more than one way to skin a cat in all of this, but it's understanding when you have to make the changes and when you have to do the skinning. Yeah.
Yes, no, I totally agree. And on the other hand, Caster Warholm, he is been with his coach from day one, even when he was begging the coach to take him in, and he has been with him all the time. And he says he believes firmly that nobody else, he believes like he is made him what he is, and he will never leave him. Yeah. So there again, the athlete realizes that that is what the coach can do for him, but Sydney didn't. And she obviously, I think she made the correct choice. So it's again, individual and different to each person.
Yep, correct.
Well, the 4 hurdles will be in the morning session. As we mentioned yesterday, all the hurdle finals are in the morning session. So for us in the UK, it means waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch that. Okay, we have like 4 minutes left. I think we should just, any last thoughts before we close this up for tomorrow? I think tomorrow, because it's the women's 200, I think there'll be a lot more talk about the performances of the 2 ladies from Namibia. So we'll maybe save that testosterone talk for tomorrow night, especially if they come in medal or come in 4th and 5th, maybe the way it's going. But any final thoughts for anybody? Otherwise, Frank, we'll let you close it up. Yeah, we're like 2 minutes left.
Okay, so very, very quickly, some of you may have noticed that my background changed in the course of the session today. My apologies for that. I had to go and get my first bit of serious physiotherapy following a knee operation. And the only unfortunate part about the experience today was that I think the physiotherapist was quite a religious lady, and unfortunately made her aware of some words that she would never have heard in a place of worship, because it was quite painful and I was quite vocal at the end of the day. But thank you for being patient with that, Jimson. I appreciate that. Appreciate you for doing that. I'd like to thank you again once more for the outstanding job you're doing in conducting this fantastic orchestra we have here. I'd like to also thank all of the panelists who are overlapping from day to day now, and we're all very happy with that. But the contribution to the discussion here, I think, is fantastic. I feel pretty confident that this idea we have of growing the notion of a virtual coaches club whenever we have a major championships in the future is going to grow and grow. And one of the things you may all be interested in is that we are keeping recordings of all of these things. And we're going to pass these recordings wherever they come in the world. We're going to push these through to World Athletics, Global Athletics Coaching Academy, who are going to locate all of these things on what I'm calling the learning mall, which Laurent Bouquier will refer to as the e-learning platform for coaches. So the good news is we won't lose any of these things. You'll be able to come back and refer to them in the future. But once again, Jimson, fantastic job, mate. I'm really, really privileged that you're working with us on this. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the week. Well done, everybody. Look forward to seeing you later.
My pleasure. So 3 quick thank yous. First, thank you to the coaches and panelists who are there in Tokyo. That's Sean Pickering and Gunter. Thank you for staying up till 3:30 in the morning for this. Second, thank you to the other panelists, Rita, Peter Erickson, and Christine. Thank you for joining again, and Danie as well. Forgot Danie. And third, another thank you for Peter Thompson, who's the unofficial panelist, but should have been a panelist. So again, thank you for all the coaches who made this session wonderful. Again, tomorrow, same time, 6 p.m. UK time, 7 p.m. Europe, 2 o'clock in the morning in Tokyo. I hope to see you all again tomorrow night. Share this link with your friends. And yeah, I'm looking forward to tomorrow's sessions. And let's see who wins the 400-meter hurdles. It's going to be interesting to see.
Yes, that's all on.
So see you all tomorrow. Bring your questions, bring your friends, bring your athletes, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Well done, James. Well done, Jimson. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.